Welcome to the last stop in the video hop for Altenew's Marvelous Monthly Series for November 2023. I'll put all the information on the hop and the other stops, as well as some information on a giveaway in the description box below. If you're new to my channel, hello and welcome. My name is Amanda, and I'm so happy you're here. Today's hop features many great products, but I will be focusing on the Flourishing Garden Craft Your Life project kit. I was very inspired when creating with this kit, and I ended up making 5 cards, so I'll be sharing those with you today. But first, let's talk about what's included in the Flourishing Garden Craft Your Life project kit. So you get a 6x8 stamp set like you see here, and there is a very large floral image included. It's actually more than 6 inches tall, so it can be used for a variety of different card sizes, which is great, super versatile. There are 4 larger greetings in a very fabulous font that are included, and a whole plethora of sub-sentiments. There are sentiments for really any occasion you could hope for. Anniversary, the holidays, just a general thinking of you, supportive things for friends, whatever it is, you name it, it's there. Also included in this kit is the coordinating die for the floral image, as well as dies for the larger greetings, which is fabulous. It cuts them nice and close. You get a mini blending brush, and these are fabulous if you haven't used them before. I've used them today for the first time, and I love them. You get a 6-piece layering stencil set to help you color in that gorgeous floral image. There's a lot of detail to it, and it's really fabulous. And lastly, there is a 3D embossing folder that's included in the kit. So pulling out the little inspiration guide from the stamp set here, there's some really fabulous ideas to get your creativity flowing in case you need that to get going. It's very helpful. So there's that, as well as the layering guide for the layering stencils, which it's super helpful to see this broken down since it can get a little confusing working with those stencils as you layer up the color. So that is a wonderful thing to have on hand, and I referred to it multiple times while crafting. So I'm pulling out a 6x6 piece of smooth white cardstock because my idea today is to make a twofer. This floral image is so large that to me, I really wanted to stretch my crafting session and get 2 cards out of it, so I decided to make 2 mini slimlines with 1 panel. Since this image is pretty much 6x6, it's, taller than 6 inches from the bottom of that sort of begonia-like flower to the top coneflower, and it's basically 6 inches wide as well, so that makes it perfect for this. So I have my 6x6 piece of paper in my MISTI, and I'm just kind of moving things around so that I can get this stamp positioned how I like it. Here I'm pulling my ruler out just to see where the 3-inch mark is because I would be cutting this panel down at 3 inches. So I'm just kind of adjusting my image so that I get enough floral coverage on each side. And once I have that image straightened out how I wanted it so that it's going to be split fairly well, I picked it up at the door of my MISTI. And before I get to stamping, I actually decided to put a little bit of repositionable adhesive on the back of my cardstock here, just in case I needed to stamp a couple times because I didn't want the paper shifting around where I'd have to completely start over. So I'm just rubbing my finger on the stamp here just to get off some of the residue from production, just to really prime the stamp since this is the first time I'm using it. I prepped my paper with some anti-static powder, and then I am inking up that stamp with some Versamark ink. And I'm really trying to saturate it really well since this is, a new stamp, and I think my ink pad was dry when I was doing this, so I maybe went a little heavy-handed. And then I did check my image and double stamped in the spots that needed a little bit more ink or a little bit more pressure. So I decided to powder this up with some ultrafine black embossing powder from Simon Says Stamp. If you've been following along, this is definitely one of my favorite embossing powders that I have that's black because it makes a really fabulous, juicy embossing. It's kind of hard to see in the video here. I don't really think it's noticeable, but it's a solid embossing. It's really, really pretty. So for my color palette today, I was going fall. So I pulled out spice cider, cayenne, fig, orchid, grape soda, and avocado ink. These are not Altenew inks, but I will list colors in the Altenew lines that I think are similar to these, and I will have those listed on my blog, which I will link down below. So I'm pulling out the layering stencils here, and the nice thing is that they are marked in the corners 1 through 6, which that's great. I would say you should probably do these in order, especially with some of the more detailed layers. So I'm lining up this first one here, and I'm masking off the areas that I definitely could see myself accidentally inking over. So I'm just masking off with a little bit of, with some Post-it notes or some scrap paper, and I'm gonna start blending. So I pulled out orchid ink here to blend on this coneflower because I kind of wanted it to have that purpley look that a lot of them do. I think they're also called echinacea, I believe. Not 100% sure, but that was the vibe I was going for. So once I have that guy blended on, I'm just going to mask it off so that I can move on to the sort of begonia-like flowers that are in the middle. Before doing that, I'm just going to check my layering guide here because I wanted to use spice cider and cayenne, and I wasn't sure which layer I was blending on here. And so from looking at the layering guide, I figured out that I am blending my lighter layer, so I don't need that cayenne ink yet. So I'm going to start off with spice cider. So I'm just going to blend that on regularly, not with a heavy hand or anything, but just like normal. Just going to fill that up with color here. And once that's all blended up and ready to go, I can move on to my next flower. So for the little sort of aster-like flowers down in the bottom there, I'm going to blend those with some fig ink. And then once that's done, I can remove my little masks and my scrap pieces of paper, and I can readjust the stencil to get that middle coneflower. And if you have a grip mat or if you have the sticky mat from your Altenew stamp wheel, that's a great tool to use when stenciling because it really holds your stencil on well, and the parts where it doesn't make contact with the mat, you can just tape down or hold. So I popped off that first stencil, and now I'm moving on to stencil number 2. I'm going to line up that stencil, and I'm going to stencil the second half of those asters in fig ink, and then I'm going to move on to those middle flowers with a bit more spice cider ink, and then I'll finish this stencil off, or this part, with some orchid ink on that coneflower. So again, I'm blending on more spice cider to those middle flowers and repositioning that stencil when needed, and just switching between these 3 colors. And I did blend the coneflowers on a little bit lighter because I don't have a color that is a next step in that shade, but that can just be remedied with blending with a heavier hand. And then at this point, I did notice that I was getting a little bit of ink smearing or smudging, and I think it's just the ink that was sitting on top of my embossed lines that was kind of getting spread around, which at the time was a little bit of a bummer, but it's manageable just by die cutting, so we just had to pivot on my idea just a little bit. So I'm coming back to those coneflowers here with a heavier hand in the same orchid ink because I don't have that second shade that's a little bit darker in, that color family. And then I'm moving on to the middle flower, and I'm blending on some cayenne ink there since that's a bit darker than spice cider. And then moving over to the asters and blending on grape soda for a darker purple and a bit of a impactful shadow. And as you see here, the image is really coming along, and I'm really liking how it's turning out. So I'm moving back again to that orchid ink, just trying to saturate that coneflower and really get a dramatic shadow as you see here. And then I'm just going to continue doing more of the same, just building up the layers with darker colors or a heavier hand. And I honestly love how this is turning out. To me, it's like fall perfection, and it makes me feel alive. And so for the flower centers, I'm pulling in some Stardust ink here for that begonia. And I do end up using Stardust on every flower. I do pull in another color, which you'll see here soon. So now we are on the 5th stencil. These are the 5th and 6th stencils that I'm holding together here, so you see what's left. So it's just the flower centers and the leaves. So we're in the home stretch. And so I'm going to pop that 5th stencil down there, and I'm going to blend Stardust ink for the coneflower centers since I want those to be a deep yellow, and then I'm going to bring honeycomb ink on the flower centers for the remaining flowers because that'll be a little bit more of a pop. And so with the flower centers stenciled on, I can blend on my leaves using avocado ink. This is a really good ink. It plays with these tones really well. It's a very harmonious color palette in that sense. I think all these colors look really great together, especially for a fall themed card. So now I just have to pop that stencil off and readjust it to get that last leaf there. And I'm just going to quickly blend that on. And then here I have that 6th stencil, the 6th and final stencil lined up, and I'm heavily blending on Stardust ink on those cone flowers. I want those flower centers to be really dark and a little bit dramatic. And then I'm just adding the Stardust ink over some of the other flower centers that adds a bit of dimension. So I'm pulling in artichoke ink for my leaf details. And here is that final stenciled panel. I think it's gorgeous. I love how vibrant those cone flowers are and really all the flowers are, so I'm happy. So I'm going to pop that panel in my paper trimmer and I'm going to cut it down to 3 inches. So this will split it directly in half. And that way I can make my 2 mini slimlines with these. And like I said, I do have quite a bit of ink all over my panels, which changed my idea from being one layered to more than one. So I die cut out that first half there. And one thing I did want to mention is on my Big Shot, it was a little tight getting the die through, but the Platinum 6, if you have one, there's a bit more space on the side, so the die should fit through with no issue. I had no issue with the Big Shot, but I just wanted to make mention that it can be a little tight. So I pulled out some ivory cardstock here because I was trying to decide between having a white card, not a card base, a card panel, or an ivory one. And I think ivory wins out because it really pulls something from these florals in a way that white couldn't. And so at this point, I was thinking, okay, well, my card base and my little border around it is going to be white. It's going to be fine. But again, I changed my mind. I wasn't quite a fan of all of that white, so I tried some orchid cardstock, which matches the ink that I blended on the cone flowers. And I thought it was pretty, but I thought it was a bit kind of overwhelming. It kind of overpowered the rest of the colors, and it just didn't feel right. So I ended up pulling out some craft cardstock. In this case, it was wheat cardstock. And that, to me, as soon as I saw it, it was a winner. I knew I had to do it. I thought it was gorgeous. So I cut that wheat cardstock down to 6 1/4 by 3 1/4, since that's going to be the size of my mini slimline card base, or at least when the card base is folded. And so now that I was seeing how things were going, I decided to heat emboss some sentiments in gold embossing powder. I chose the Big Hugs and the Friend. And then I decided to kind of snuggle those in close to the flowers, just make things a little snug. And then I decided to heat emboss a sub-sentiment below it. So I heat embossed "You Are Amazing" and "I Miss You" in that same black embossing powder that I used on the floral image. And yeah, I like having these sub-sentiments. I think it really adds to the card, and I love the contrast between the 2 different embossing powders. So I glued the wheat cardstock onto my card base there, and then I glued on my ivory panels, making sure that I have a good 1/8 inch border on each side. And then I just put those aside to dry. And then at this point, I was deciding that I think these floral images need to be popped up. So I pulled out some waffle flower foam strips and I covered the backs of these images in probably way too much foam tape, but I decided to go for it since these images can be a little bit fragile. especially towards the top where the coneflowers sit. So like you see here, there's a lot of foam tape, a lot of it on these images. And so I'm just lining the image up with my ivory panel. And I honestly could have waited to put the ivory panel on my card base and line things up easier using my Score Buddy, but this is how I did it. So do whatever works for you. And then I decided that my larger sentiments needed a little bit of loft to them. So I decided that those would be popped up on some thin foam squares. So that way it's like I have kind of a cascade of dimension. The floral images are my highest, like the thickest dimension that I have. And then my sentiments are one step lower, at least for the friend and the big hugs. And then the sub sentiment is the lowest. So yeah, I just really like that kind of differing dimensions so things stand out in their own way. So I peeled the backers off of my foam tape or my foam squares, and I put a little bit of glue on those foam squares just so that when I stick it down, I have a little bit of wiggle time with it, since putting things on straight is not always my forte. But this is how those two images look together, and I decided to finish these cards off with some jewels. These are from Buttons Galore and More. I think it's called their Christmas jewel set. I'll link it on my blog. But this is what those gems look like. They're kind of opaque and a little bit kind of silvery, but very iridescent, that they're sort of subtle, but not too subtle where you don't notice them. You could also use some dewdrops or enamel dots, whatever you want to do here to really bring a little bit of shine to the card. But I'm really happy with how these turned out. I love that I could make 2 cards with 1 image. You get more out of your crafting time. And it's great to have more cards made than, you normally get. So I was really happy with that, with getting 2 cards out of this crafting session. But this image, it can be used for a variety of card sizes. You could do slimline, 5x7, A2. The possibilities are endless, and the ways that it can be used are as well. So, last but not least, I created 3 cards using the Flourishing Garden 3D embossing folder that was included in this kit. I have 2 that are pretty similar and 1 that's a little bit different, but they all feature some partial embossing. So I have some Distress watercolor cardstock, and I have some Lindy's Magical Shakers. I have 2 of those, and I have the Lindy's Magical Powders Victorian Bouquet set. And so I have never actually used 3D embossing folders before. I've used regular 2D ones a couple times, but they're not something that I reach for too often. So to me, using a panel that I had Lindy's Magical Powders with just kind of took a little bit of that, intimidating factor away for me. So here I am. This is my first time using Lindy's as well. And whenever I have alcohol ink or whatever I'm doing like this, I always say that my first one is kind of my ugly panel. And I say that very subjectively. It's the one that's always chaotic and not like what I want at all. So that's just kind of my, learning panel. So here for this second one, I've decided that I want to make something that's a little bit blue and green. So I'm spraying my cardstock down with water and then just sprinkling the powder over it. And I'm purposefully ignoring the kind of bottom strip of cardstock here because at this point, I was really thinking about partial embossing this. I thought that was the way to go. There's just something about it that I was like, oh, that's fun, that's unique. And I don't know, I was ready to do it. But yeah, to me, for some reason, that partial embossing really stuck out. So I also decided to create a second one using a little bit more pinks and blues here, because at first I thought I was just going to make 1 card, but I ended up making a couple backgrounds to pick whichever one I liked better. And I did the same thing where I focused the color mainly everywhere except for the last ½ inch or so of the watercolor cardstock. And I'm just sprinkling on a little bit more powder, getting everything how I like it and moving it around. And so with that one done, I'm just going to put these aside for them to dry and let them dry overnight. But you can definitely dry them with a heat gun. Just be careful doing so. And so this is that first panel. You can really see all the sparkle and shine for it, but it's not quite what I'm looking for. Here's my blue panel. It's looking pretty good. This one, for some reason, reminds me of a dinosaur painting. I don't know why. I see it in the middle for some reason. And then this one, I really love how fun and colorful it is. And last but not least is the purple and blue one. And I really like how this one turned out. It's really, really shiny, and I think it just looks really good. So I'm pulling out that 3D embossing folder, and I'm going to get ready to do some embossing. So this is my little sample piece here that I really like, that bottom kind of vine, you know, a good 1/2 inch or so off the bottom of the cardstock. So I'm going to spray the back of my cardstock here with a light misting of water. And I have seen other crafters saying that this is pretty essential when you use 3D embossing folders since the paper stretches so much. So I would keep that in mind. So I have that lined up how I like it, and I'm just kind of making it so that that little last swoop on the bottom of the folder kind of hits where the bottom of the color is. So I pulled out my Platinum 6, and I'm building my sandwich here for this, where you use the platform base, your embossing folder, and then the adapter plate. So I'm just going to run that through my Platinum 6, both forwards and backwards, and this is how it turned out. I really love how the 3D embossing, it really makes the shine pop, I feel like. And so at this point, like I said, I decided, okay, we're going to make multiples of these. So I did the same thing with the blue and green panel, and I ran it through my machine, and I like how they look. I'm really happy. It would honestly, you could make a set of note cards like this, and they come together so quickly. All you need to do is slap a sentiment on there, and you're good to go. And so I like how those are looking, but I decided I wanted to try it with some plain cardstock. So I have a piece of Briar Rose cardstock cut down to 6 1/4 by 3 1/4 because I'm going to make another mini slimline. And I'm just misting the back of that cardstock and sliding it into the folder just like I did on the other two. And then I'm going to run it through exactly how I did before. But one thing that I did notice this time is it seemed like I needed a little bit more pressure. I don't know if it was a pressure thing or if I didn't roll through enough on the bottom there. I'm kind of speculating that might be what it was to get the full embossing my first go around. But I ended up putting a very thin paper shim in here. I just ran it through once. And the only downside to this is that I did get a little bit of a kind of edge there where you can see where the embossing folder hit it. But I decided to leave it as is because we're striving, you know, for a completed card and not for perfection. And that's something that I'm really trying to do more of lately and not get so hung up on things. So I decided that for this one, I wanted to make it a little different. So I wanted to pull out some white pigment ink and kind of rub it over the embossing to really make it stand out. And I was really trying to keep my ink cube flat so that I would avoid the little valleys between the embossing, but I definitely didn't do that in some spots, so I just kind of smudged away what I could. But here is what that card turned out like. I, heat embossed my sentiment and a nice sub-sentiment, popped it on the middle of the card there, and I just added some pearls for some embellishment. I just tucked them around the little flourishes and the vines and flowers. And I'm really happy with how this card turned out. I think this is a really good supportive card, or it could even be great for a sympathy card. And I followed that same kind of formula, I would say, with these last two cards here. I did the same thing. I just popped up a greeting, and I just added some gems in blue for this card and then pink for the next one, just to kind of bring a bit of shine and make it really fun. But yeah, I really think that the Lindy's Magical Powders really help to make the embossing stand out a lot. But I'm really happy with how these cards turned out. They were super quick to make, so if you want to just bust out a bunch of cards, maybe for a Christmas gift or something like that, this would be a great way to do so. Thanks so much for hopping along today. I hope you gave some likes and subscribes to the other creators on this hop as well as to myself. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, I hope to catch you next time.